another way we see this aspect of his life and preaching is his emphasis on the possibility of repentance for any sins, and no matter how often you've sinned, he says, never despair. Despair is from the devil, from the evil one who wants to destroy you, who wants to convince you that your sin is somehow bigger than God's love. And that's preposterous, right? Your sin is like a drop in the ocean of God's love.
Christos anesti ec negrum fanato
Can you talk about the liturgy of St. John? And I know
A
you
little
aren't
bit.
a liturgical scholar.
Yeah, I'm not by any means.
But can you talk about how it developed, and maybe I don't know if you're familiar with what might have been before, and what kind of are characteristics of it, and yeah.
Okay, just briefly, because it is certainly not my forte. Um, but it is really important to understand that Christian worship from the very beginning flowed out of the Jewish forms of worship, centered in the Psalms, centered tremendously in the Psalms, right? The Psalm book of the Jewish people, and it continues that way. It's still really the song book of the early church, because the first Christians were all Jews. It's natural that they would continue the Jewish forms of worship, including attending worship in the temple. We have several indications of that in the book of Acts. Peter and John, for instance, on their way to the temple when they encountered the crippled man. St. Paul saying in the book of Acts, he's hastening to get back to Jerusalem in time for Pentecost. The Christian year is simply an ongoing, of course, enhanced, let's say, version of the Jewish, let's say, liturgical year. So there's the direct continuity there. Of course, everything from Judaism is given Christian content. The first actual liturgy is attributed to St. James, the first Christian liturgy, St. James, the first bishop of Jerusalem. And I have never attended a celebration of that liturgy, but they say if it's all done, it can be 4 hours long. Then the next one we're really aware of is the liturgy of Saint Basil the Great, right? And he lived in the middle of the 4th century. And then Chrysostom lives pretty much in the very next generation after Saint Basil. And it's so interesting to me. The liturgy attributed to Saint John Chrysostom is basically the same as the liturgy of St. Basil, but the prayers, some of the prayers, especially surrounding the offering of the Eucharist, are shorter. And I just think, well, that it's kind of reflecting his pastoral concern that the liturgy not be too long for his people. And it reminds me of speaking with Mother Macrina back in around 1990. She was a well-known eldress abbess from Greece. This was her one trip to America, and we sat at her feet in one of the dwellings at the Greek monastery in Saxonburg. And then I got to sit with her at the meal, and I was telling her about my work on St. John Chrysostom, and she just lit up with a big smile. And she said, St. John Chrysostom is a wide river.
Mhm.
And then she said, St. Basil, she went like this, more narrow.
Mhm.
And there's just something to it. St. Basil's liturgy is longer. Chrysostom, adapts it, making some of the prayers shorter. And it just reflects. Chrysostom has these glorious ideals. Uh, one time he says, I wish you would all be always in prayer. Of course, it's just what St. Paul says, right? Pray without ceasing. So he says, I wish you would all be always in prayer. But if not always, at least most of the time. And if not most of the time, at least now and then. And then he says, at least in the morning and in the evening prayers. So, and that's his pastoral's heart that comes through, you know.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
it's just he's beautiful that way. And what about in the famous Paschal homily that I've referred to? We recall how he says, even if you haven't started laboring in the fast until the 11th hour, come to the festival just as if you had started laboring at the first hour, right? And of course, Jesus gives, right, the same wages to those who only worked 1 hour uh, compared with those who worked all 12 hours. So that's his heart. That's his heart. So filled with love for his flock, aware of his own, right? Everyone's weaknesses. Uh, Another way we see this aspect of his life and preaching is his emphasis on the possibility of repentance for any sins, and no matter how often you've sinned, he says, never despair. Despair is from the devil, from the evil one who wants to destroy you, who wants to convince you that your sin is somehow bigger than God's love. And that's preposterous, right? Your sin is like a drop in the ocean of God's love. So never despair. That's one of his greatest messages.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.